Hi, my name is Wendy Cohen, and I'm going to talk about my capstone project for Latin American and Caribbean Studies. So first, to give you a bit of information about myself, I was a double major in Spanish and Latin American Studies, and I did my capstone project in the spring semester of 2012. My capstone was about Mexico, and since the situation there is so unstable, a lot of what I wrote just a year ago has changed and developed. So I'm going to give a summary of my paper and the results that I gathered, and then I'm going to expand upon those results and give you a short update about the situation today. So my paper was titled Drug Policy and Human Rights Violations in Calderon's Mexico. To begin, I'll briefly summarize the past 20 years of how drug policy and drug-related violence got to the point where it is today. So drug prohibition in the U.S. has created a large demand for drugs, and has made the U.S. the largest market in the world for drugs. Countries south of us have been responding to that market, and because there are few opportunities to work and the money is so good in drug trafficking, it has become a huge industry. In the 1980s and early 1990s, for example, the drugs primarily transported from South America through the Caribbean into South Florida. The U.S. government began interdicting more drugs that travel by sea to the Gulf states, and now the new preferred route is by land through Central America and Mexico, and so we see a major shift in these drug trafficking routes and how it has affected Mexico. In the 1990s under President Salinas and in the 2000s under President Fox, they began to pass more security reforms, particularly because they wanted to keep a safe trade negotiation after NAFTA happened in 1994 that would promote business interests with the U.S. And although Fox was hesitant to use public force, knowing that it would only feed drug-related violence, he decided to launch Operation Safe Mexico in 2005. And this initiative deployed the Mexican Army and Federal Preventative Police to 8 different cities where violence was getting out of hand. The following year, in 2006, when Calderon became president, he expanded on the strategy of using military occupations, and he requested additional funding from the U.S. for what became the Mérida Initiative in 2007. So now that the history of drug policy in Mexico has been explained, I'm going to talk more about how that had an effect on human rights. So when the military performed security functions without an effective civilian oversight, human rights violations are more likely to occur, especially in a state that has a history of corruption and impunity. Calderon's decision to deploy 50,000 troops across the country at the start of his presidency was a predictor of more violence and violations of basic rights. One of the difficulties in getting an accurate picture of human rights violations in current circumstances is because the victims are intimidated into silence. The main source of reporting on deaths and kidnappings has been through newspapers, but there have been unfortunate cases of violence against members of the media, such as reporters and writers, and many journalists have stopped publishing their names with their articles due to threats from criminal organizations. In Mexico overall, the violence has become more generalized. The Mexican army, which is largely funded by the U.S. aid, has been the subject of an escalating number of human rights abuses. A 2009 report by Amnesty International documents increasing reports of serious human rights violations such as enforced disappearances, unlawful and extrajudicial killings, torture and other ill treatment, and arbitrary detention committed by members of the Mexican military. The human rights violations reported have increased by over 1,000% since 2006. The military and police forces have also seen widespread impunity. The military justice system tries military personnel accused of human rights violations, which transfers cases to the military prosecutor. This policy causes a lack of independence and impartiality that denies victims and their families access to justice. This current policy is contrary to international standards or on the lack of independence of military judicial systems. The climate of impunity allows serious human rights abuses to go unpunished. Another clear violation of human rights on the part of the U.S. government this time is the construction of an 18-foot fence along the Texas-Mexico border, which began in 2006 with the Secure Fence Act. Class action lawsuits were filed against Department of Homeland Security because they had failed to properly consult with individuals and communities affected by the wall, to consider alternatives to the wall, or to negotiate regarding the taking of land. The wall also had a particularly negative impact on Native American communities, including the federally recognized Kickapoo and Isalta del Sur tribes that lives and practice their traditional cultures and religions along the Texas-Mexico border. So how do we strengthen democracy and reduce the number of human rights abuses? First, we have to integrate human rights into the military and police force, and that doesn't just mean training for the officers, but implementing the principles by offering promotions based on respect of human rights and other incentives. Human rights groups and government should be working together to strengthen civilian capacities, for example, improving public security, providing basic services, and ensuring criminal investigations take place. Further, the U.S. must do more to stem the flow of illegal arms, laundered money, and illegal drugs across the border. The U.S. must take responsibility for creating the demand for drugs that Mexicans profit from. The U.S. needs to expand drug treatment, drug education, and measures to rehabilitate addicts. Reducing this demand would lower drug profits that are used to corrupt officials to buy guns and that threaten democracy. In addition, improving the economy is an essential part of the strategy because it provides alternatives to engaging in organized crime. Another method that would improve U.S.-Mexican relations is to improve the current immigration policy. The workforce is forced to live underground, which allows illegal profits to be hidden in the flow of honestly earned money, making it difficult to decipher clean or dirty money. If the U.S. created a flexible worker program that ensured employer verification, it would regularize the status of the unauthorized workforce that's already in the country. In conclusion, the conflict has reached a point where the drug policies are doing more harm than the actual drugs themselves are. It's time to examine the effects of this 40-year drug war and see if these policies, if the costs have been worse than the benefits. So, that was what I concluded 1 year ago, and I just want to follow up with some updated statistics and some new recommendations. First, in July of last year, a new president was elected, Enrique Peña Nieto, who has pledged to continue with the strategy Calderon has used that had such devastating results. Obama was just in Mexico last week to talk to Peña Nieto about the immigration reform bill, and experts in Mexico have urged them to emphasize human rights and not just border security as the focus of their policy changes. Also last week, one of the UN human rights specialists visited Mexico and came out with a report on Friday that urged Mexico to stem human rights violations and violence. Now the death toll in Mexico is reported by the government as around 50,000, but reporters and human rights groups estimate that the actual death toll is somewhere between 100,000 and 150,000 deaths since 2006. That was when President Calderon got into office. So over the past year, 2 pieces of human rights legislation were passed in Mexico. In 2012, in August, the Supreme Court ruled that the use of the military jurisdiction to prosecute human rights violations was unconstitutional. And in June, Mexico passed a constitutional amendment that makes attacks on the press a federal crime, giving federal prosecutors the power to take over such investigations from local prosecutors. All of the social problems that have resulted from militarization have become even more extreme over the past year, everything from mass incarceration, human struggling, sexual violence, arms trafficking, money laundering, corruption, kidnappings, poverty, education, and unemployment. And as a response, we've seen many community groups and social movement organizations respond. I highly recommend a documentary film called The House I Live in which it describes the movement for peace with justice and dignity, spearheaded by Javier Sicilia, the poet, and the Caravan for Peace that they've done over the past year. If anyone is interested in getting more information, feel free to contact me via email, that's cohen1db@gmail.com, or on Facebook. And I will be moving back to Mexico in August to work as an English teacher, and I plan to have a blog so I can spend some of my time continuing my research and doing some human rights observing while I'm there. Thanks for listening, and congratulations to everyone who completed a capstone project, and I hope you all have a great summer. Bye-bye.